April 9th, 1945, 6:13 p.m. Greta Brenner stared at the yellow object on her metal tray. She was 23 years old, 5 feet 4 inches tall, 87 pounds. Her body mass index was 14.9, critical malnutrition. She should have weighed 120 pounds. The yellow thing in front of her was corn, grilled corn, still hot, glistening with melted butter. Char marks ran across the kernels in black stripes. Greta whispered one word: Schweinefutter, pig food. Behind her, 33 other German women sat on wooden benches, all of them staring at their trays, all of them seeing the same thing, none of them moving. What happened in the next 47 minutes would shatter everything Greta Brenner believed about her enemy. 3 days earlier, Greta had been running. April 7th, 1945, outside Cologne. The war was collapsing like a building with its foundation blown out. American Sherman tanks ground through the streets. Artillery percussion echoed for miles. Greta ran with her signals unit. 34 women in grey-blue auxiliary uniforms. They had spent the war routing communications through switchboards in concrete bunkers. They had never fired weapons. On April 7th, they received orders to retreat eastward. By April 9th, those orders meant nothing. American infantry had encircled their position. Greta stood in a muddy farmyard, hands raised, uniform splattered with filth from 3 days of walking. He gestured for them to sit by a hedgerow, while his men secured the farmhouse. Then he did something Greta would remember for the rest of her life. He offered her his canteen, his own canteen. He held it out to her with a steady hand. Greta stared at it. Was it poison? Was it a trick? She took the canteen, opened it, smelled it. Water, clean water. She drank. And then, for the first time in 6 months, Greta Brenner cried. Not from gratitude, from confusion. Everything she had been told was that the Americans would rape them, torture them, kill them without mercy. This soft-spoken man who smelled of tobacco and machine oil was handing out water like they were guests instead of prisoners. Around her, the other women were experiencing the same shock. Liesl Fischer, 28 years old, a telephone operator from Berlin, sharp-tongued and cynical. When an American soldier handed her a blanket, she wept. Ilse Steinmann, 32, a military nurse from Hamburg. She had watched 200 men die from infected wounds because there was no penicillin. Now she sat wrapped in an American blanket, unable to process the contradiction. Elfriede Langer, 19, the youngest, an anti-aircraft helper. She weighed 79 pounds. She had not eaten a full meal in 11 days. She was too weak to climb into the truck by herself. A black American soldier lifted her up as gently as if she were his own sister. Corporal Woodrow Patterson, from Mississippi. He handed her a tin cup of coffee. Real coffee. And then there was Hildegard Dietz, 37 years old, a barracks supervisor from Munich. She had believed in the Reich. She had believed Germany would win. She sat on the truck bed with her arms folded across her chest, refusing to look at the Americans. Even now, even in defeat, she believed. The trucks rumbled toward a transit camp near Koblenz. The camp appeared at dusk. It was not a death camp. It was not a starvation camp. It was a processing facility. Former Wehrmacht barracks, now requisitioned by American forces. The guards were not brutal. They were not cruel. They were professional. The women were led to a medical intake station, a table, a scale, a clipboard. Corporal Emmett Lindgren sat at the table, 29 years old, a farmer's son from Minnesota. Before the war, he had managed grain inventories on a 1,000-acre farm. Now he managed paperwork for 6,000 prisoners of war. He was meticulous. Emmett looked at Greta and gestured to the scale. She stepped on. 87 pounds. He wrote it down. Then he measured her height, 5 feet 4 inches. He did a quick calculation in the margin of his form. Body mass index, 14.9. He looked up at her. His face was neutral, but his eyes registered concern. He made a note on the form and handed it to another soldier. The process repeated for all 34 women. Liesl Fischer, 92 pounds. Dislocated shoulder from a bomb blast. Ilse Steinmann, 98 pounds. Iron deficiency anemia. Elfriede Lange, 79 pounds, severe malnutrition, edema in her legs, could not walk without assistance. Hildegard Dietz, 101 pounds, refused to answer questions. That night, Emmett would write in his personal journal, April 9, 1945, processed 34 German auxiliary women, average weight 91 pounds, all suffering malnutrition, 3 critical cases. They stared at us like we were going to kill them. Instead, we gave them blankets and coffee. But Emmett understood. He had processed 6,000 prisoners in 8 months. He had seen this before, the shock, the confusion, the slow realization that everything they had been told about their captors was a lie. While the women were being processed, 3 miles away at the main supply depot, trucks were being unloaded. The American military supply system in April 1945 was the largest logistical operation in human history. Every day, American forces in Europe consumed 800,000 tons of supplies. The famous Red Ball Express operated 24 hours a day, 6,000 trucks, 23,000 men, moving 12,500 tons of supplies every day at its peak, and prisoners of war were fed from the same kitchens as American soldiers. This was not kindness, this was doctrine. The Geneva Convention required it. Staff Sergeant Vincent Thibault stood at the depot watching the trucks unload. Canned beef, powdered milk, flour, coffee, sugar, and 200 crates of Iowa corn. Sweet corn, the kind meant for human consumption, grown on family farms across the Midwest, shipped across the submarine-infested Atlantic, just to feed prisoners. Vincent had seen this moment before, many times. He knew what was coming. Private Lester Simons stood next to him. 21 years old, 4th-generation Nebraska farmer. He had grown up eating corn at every summer meal. To Lester, corn was childhood. It was normal. He looked at Vincent. "You think they'll eat it, Sarge?" Vincent lit a cigarette. "Eventually." "What do you mean, eventually?" "Germans don't eat corn. They think it's livestock feed." Lester blinked. "What?" "In Germany, corn is called maize. They grow it for cattle and pigs. They don't eat it themselves." Vincent exhaled smoke. Different culture. To them, we're about to serve them pig food. Lester looked at the crates. 200 crates of perfectly good corn. "So what do we do?" Vincent smiled. "Same thing we always do. Serve it. And wait." That evening, the field kitchen fired up. Private Lester Simons and his crew could feed 1,200 men in under 2 hours. The menu was standard: beef stew, white bread, canned peaches, coffee with real sugar, and grilled corn. Lester worked the grill with practiced efficiency. Turn the cob slowly, watch for the char, brush on butter at the perfect moment. The smell of sweet corn and wood smoke filled the compound. At 6 o'clock exactly, the women were called to the serving line. Military precision, even for prisoners. They lined up with metal trays. One by one, they moved past the serving station. Greta was 5th in line. She watched the women ahead of her receive their food. She saw their faces, shock, disbelief. Then she reached the front. Lester looked at her, smiled, picked up 2 corn cobs with a pair of tongs, and placed them on her tray. Greta froze. Behind her, Liesl Fischer leaned forward to see what had caused the delay. When she saw the corn, her face twisted. "Was ist das?" she muttered. "What is that?" When Greta sat down, Liesl whispered urgently, "They're feeding us Tierfutter, animal feed." The words spread through the group like fire. Tierfutter, Schweinfutter, Viehfutter, pig food, livestock feed. Ilse Steinmann looked at the corn on her tray and felt her stomach turn. She had grown up on a farm outside Hamburg. Her family had grown corn every summer, not to eat, to chop into silage and feed to the cattle and pigs. Corn was not human food. Hildegard Dietz held her corn cob by the very tip, as if it might contaminate her fingers. "Why are they doing this?" she whispered. Another woman answered, her voice bitter. "They think we are animals." The cultural divide was absolute. In Germany, Corn had been grown for centuries, but never as food for people. It was animal fodder. But in the United States, corn was a staple. By 1945, American farmers produced over 3 billion bushels of corn annually. Sweet corn was grilled at summer picnics, boiled at family dinners. To a boy from Iowa or Nebraska, grilled corn was normal. To a woman from Berlin or Munich, it was livestock feed. Private Lester Simons noticed the women were not eating. They sat in rows on the benches, trays in front of them, corn untouched. He walked over to Vincent Thibault. "Sarge, they're not eating the corn." Vincent glanced over. He saw 34 women staring at their trays like they had been served poison. He chuckled. "They don't know what it is. Should I explain?" "Won't help. Show them." Lester grabbed a corn cob from the grill, walked to the nearest table, stood in front of the women. He made eye contact with Greta, smiled broadly, and took an enormous bite. He chewed slowly, theatrically. Butter ran down his chin. He grinned. "See? It's good." The women did not move. Greta glanced around. 33 pairs of eyes watching, judging, waiting to see if she would break first. Hildegard folded her arms across her chest. "I will not eat pig food." Across the compound, Emmett Lindgren watched the scene unfold. He pulled out his notebook and wrote, 18-15 hours. All 34 refused corn. They think we're feeding them livestock rations. They have no idea this is what we eat at home. The corn sat on the trays, cooling in the evening air. The butter had begun to harden into pale streaks across the kernels, and still no one took a bite. Vincent Thibault shrugged. "Leave them be. They'll eat when they're hungry enough." But hunger alone would not be enough to cross this divide. What it would take was something simpler: curiosity. The evening air grew cooler. The women sat on wooden benches, metal trays on their laps, the yellow corn cobs growing cold. Greta Brenner held her tray. She was desperately hungry. For months, she had survived on watered-down soup, stale bread, and whatever scraps she could find. She had eaten turnips so rotten they made her gag. She had gone days without anything solid in her stomach. And now real food sat in front of her. But it was corn, animal feed, pig food. Around her, the other women whispered in German. Liesel shook her head in disgust. "I would rather starve." Hildegard pushed her tray away slightly. "This is an insult." Only Elfrida said nothing. She was too hungry to speak. Across the compound, the American soldiers finished their own meals. They ate the same corn, with no hesitation. Lester gnawed on a cob while laughing. Vincent wiped butter from his chin with the back of his hand. They were not pretending. They genuinely enjoyed this food. Greta watched them carefully. She thought about the war, about the speeches, about everything she had been told. Germans were the master race. Americans were primitive, uncultured, inferior. Yet here they were, strong, healthy, well-fed. And here she was, starving, defeated, sitting in the mud. Who was inferior now? She looked down at the corn again. The kernels gleamed in the fading light. It did not look like animal feed. It looked like food, real food. Her stomach growled, loudly. Greta made a decision. She picked up the cob. It was heavier than she expected, slippery with butter. She brought it to her lips. Then she stopped. What if she was wrong? What if it tasted like cattle feed? She thought about her grandmother, who had taught her that corn was not fit for people. But her grandmother was not here. Only hunger was here. Greta closed her eyes and bit down. The taste exploded across her tongue. Sweetness, rich, natural sweetness, unlike anything she had experienced in years. The kernels were tender, juicy, bursting with flavor as she chewed. The butter added creamy richness. The char from the grill gave it smoky depth. Her eyes flew open. This was not pig food. This was delicious. She took another bite, bigger this time, then another. She could not stop herself. Liesel was staring at her. "What are you doing?" Greta did not answer. She kept eating. Liesel watched for a long moment. Then, slowly, She picked up her own cob. She sniffed it suspiciously, touched her tongue to a single kernel. Her eyebrows rose. She took a real bite, chewed, swallowed. "Mein Gott," she whispered. "My God." Within seconds, others followed. Elfrida grabbed her corn and devoured it. Ilse took careful, measured bites. Even Hildegard, who had pushed her tray away, quietly pulled it back and began to eat. Her face did not change, but she finished both cobs without stopping. The compound fell quiet, except for the sound of chewing. Lester nudged another soldier. "Hey, look! They're eating it!" Vincent lit a cigarette and watched with quiet satisfaction. "Same thing happened with the last group," he said. "Germans always think corn is for pigs, then they taste it." Before the sun fully set, Elfrida walked back to the serving line. She held her empty tray and pointed at the remaining corn. Lester loaded 2 more cobs onto her tray. "Eat up, kid, there's plenty." Greta watched her go. She looked down at her own empty tray, her fingers sticky with butter. For the first time in weeks, her stomach was full. For the first time in months, she felt something like hope. A simple cob of corn had done what no speech, no order, no propaganda could do. It had begun to change her mind about the enemy. The days that followed were different. Something had shifted in the camp. Meals became moments of quiet connection. The women no longer approached the serving line with fear. They came with empty trays and left with full stomachs. Some even nodded at the American cooks. A few attempted small words in broken English. "Thank you." "Good." "More, please." But beneath this surface calm, something deeper was happening. These women were beginning to understand the machinery that fed them. April 12, 1945. Morning. Greta Brenner stood near the fence, watching trucks arrive at the supply depot. 6 trucks, all identical. They pulled up to the warehouse and began unloading. Crates, sacks, barrels, boxes, an endless stream of supplies. Greta counted. 40 crates of canned beef, 20 sacks of flour, 30 boxes of powdered milk, and always more corn. She had never seen anything like it. In Germany, by April 1945, the supply system had collapsed completely. Cities were starving. Bakeries stood empty. The German government could not feed its own people. But here, the Americans fed their prisoners the same rations their soldiers ate, every day, without fail. Corporal Emmett Lindgren noticed her watching. He walked over to the fence. "Curious?" he asked in English. Greta did not understand the words, but she understood the tone. She nodded. Emmett pulled out a small notebook. He drew a simple diagram. A ship, an arrow, a port, another arrow, trucks, another arrow, the camp. He pointed to each element. Le Havre, 450 miles, every day. Greta stared at the drawing. Every day? Emmett saw her expression. He nodded, pulled out his clipboard and showed her the inventory sheet. He pointed to a line. 12,500 tons per day. Greta's eyes widened. 12,500 tons, every single day. She had worked in communications. She understood logistics. The Americans were moving more supplies in one day than the entire German railway system could move in a week. And they were doing it across an ocean, through submarine-infested waters, across a continent destroyed by war. Greta felt something crack inside her chest. Not her ribs, not her bones, her certainty. Everything she had been told about American weakness was a lie. This was not weakness. This was overwhelming strength. Strength so complete that they could afford to feed their enemies. That afternoon, Staff Sergeant Vincent Thibault conducted his weekly medical inspection. It was not optional. It was protocol. Geneva Convention, Article 27. Medical care for prisoners of war must be equivalent to that provided for the captor nation's own forces. Vincent took this seriously. He had developed a protocol. Week 1, 1,200 calories per day. Week 2, 1,500 calories. Week 4, 1,800 calories. Week 8, 2,200 calories. Week 12, 2,500 calories. Full recovery. It was not sentiment. It was medical science. Vincent called the women in one by one for weigh-ins. Greta Brenner stepped onto the scale. 91 pounds, 4 pounds gained in 3 days. Vincent nodded. He made a note on her chart. Good progress. The pattern held across all 34 women. But when Elfriede Lange stepped on the scale, Vincent's expression changed. 81 pounds, only 2 pounds gained. She was still in critical danger. Vincent knelt down to her level, looked her in the eyes. He gestured to Ilse, who had some medical training. Ilse translated into German. He says you need to eat 5 small meals per day instead of 3. Your body cannot process large amounts yet. He is worried about your heart. Elfriede stared at him. This American sergeant, this enemy, was worried about her heart. She nodded slowly. Vincent stood, made detailed notes on her chart. Then he walked to the medical supply cabinet and pulled out a bottle. Thiamine tablets, vitamin B1. He handed the bottle to Ilse, explained the dosage through gestures. 1 tablet, 3 times per day, with meals. Ilse took the bottle. She looked at Vincent with something like wonder. "Why?" she asked in German. "Why do you care?" Vincent pointed to the Geneva Convention manual on his desk. Then he pointed to his own chest, over his heart. "Because it's right," he said in English. Ilse understood. She translated for the others. That night, the women sat in the barracks and talked in whispers. Hildegard Dietz spoke first. "This does not make sense. We are their enemies. Why do they treat us like patients in a hospital?" Ilse had been thinking about this for days. "I think," she said slowly, "they follow rules. Not because someone is watching, but because they believe in the rules themselves." Liesel snorted. "Rules? In war?" "Yes, rules in war." Greta spoke quietly. "I worked in a Wehrmacht communications office for 2 years. I saw the orders. We did not follow Geneva Convention. We said it was for weaklings." She paused. "But maybe we were wrong." The silence that followed was heavy. April 15th, 1945. Evening. Something new entered the camp. Music. Corporal Woodrow Patterson sat on an empty supply crate outside the mess hall. He pulled a harmonica from his pocket. Woodrow was from Mississippi, 26 years old, black. He had grown up in the Jim Crow South. He knew what it meant to be treated as less than human in his own country. But here, in Germany, something strange had happened. The German prisoners treated him with more respect than many white Americans did. They saw the uniform, the rank, not the color of his skin. It was one of war's bitter ironies. Woodrow put the harmonica to his lips and began to play. A slow blues melody, mournful and beautiful. The sound drifted across the compound. Liesel Fischer was walking back from the latrine when she heard it. She stopped, listened. She had never heard music like this before. It was not the marching songs of the Wehrmacht, not the rigid compositions of Wagner. This was pain turned into beauty. This was human. Liesel walked slowly toward the sound. Other women followed. Greta, Ilse, even Hildegard. They gathered at a respectful distance, standing in the twilight, listening. Woodrow saw them. He did not stop playing. He played another song, then another. When he finally lowered the harmonica, Liesel did something that surprised everyone, including herself. She clapped, softly, but genuinely. Woodrow looked up, surprised. He nodded at her. She nodded back. No words. No translation needed. Just one human acknowledging another's gift. From that night on, the evening concerts became routine. For those few minutes, the war felt far away. For those few minutes, they were not captor and captive. They were just people, listening to music in the gathering dark. April 18th, 1945. Greta was in the kitchen tent, helping prepare vegetables for the evening meal. Vincent had started allowing some of the women to work in food preparation. Greta was peeling potatoes when Private Lester Simons approached. "Hey," he said, "want to learn something?" He gestured for her to follow him to the grill. Lester picked up an ear of corn, still in the husk. He showed her the process. Peel back the husk, but do not remove it completely. Remove the silk threads. Fold the husk back over the corn. Soak it in water for 10 minutes. Lester demonstrated each step, slowly, with exaggerated gestures so she would understand. Then he handed her an ear of corn. "Your turn." Greta hesitated. Then she copied his movements. Lester grinned. "Good! Now we grill." After 15 minutes he pulled it off, peeled back the blackened husk. The corn inside was perfectly cooked. He brushed it with butter. Then he handed it to Greta. "You made this?" She stared at the corn in her hands. She had made this, with help from an enemy soldier who was teaching her like a patient older brother. She took a bite. It tasted different this time, because she had been part of creating it. There was pride in that, dignity. Lester watched her eat, satisfied. "See?" he said. "Easy." Greta did not know the word, but she smiled anyway. Behind them, Hildegard Dietz watched the entire exchange. Her face was hard, unreadable. That night, the confrontation came. Hildegard stood in the center of the barracks, her voice carried across the room. "We need to talk about what is happening here." The other women looked up. "Some of you," Hildegard continued, her eyes on Greta, "are forgetting yourselves. You smile at them, you work in their kitchens, you act as if we are friends instead of prisoners." Greta stood slowly. "What would you have us do instead? Resist, refuse, maintain our dignity." "Our dignity?" Ilsa's voice was sharp. She stepped forward. "I watched 200 men die because we had no medicine, no bandages, no morphine. Where was our dignity then?" "That was war. This is also war," Ilsa interrupted. "But these men follow rules. They have standards. They feed us. They care whether we live or die." "That is their trick," Hildegard's voice rose. "They want to make us weak, grateful, compliant." "No," Greta said quietly. "They want to be different than we were. They want to prove that strength does not require cruelty." The room fell silent. Hildegard looked around. She saw it in the other women's faces. They had already chosen. She had lost. April 20th, 1945. News arrived at the camp. The war in Europe was ending. Soviet forces were approaching Berlin from the east. American and British forces were pushing from the west. It was only a matter of days. But news also came of what the Allies were finding as they advanced. Concentration camps, Bergen-Belsen, Buchenwald, Dachau. Stories filtered back to the POW camps. The prisoners, the German women, heard these stories too. Some refused to believe them. Propaganda, they said. But others, like Greta and Ilsa, felt a cold dread settling in their stomachs. They remembered things they had not wanted to see, questions they had not asked. Where had their Jewish neighbors gone in 1938? Where did those trains go? They had told themselves they did not know, but not knowing was also a choice. One evening, Vincent Thibault gathered the women. Through a translator, he told them about Buchenwald, about the mass graves, the gas chambers, the walking skeletons, the children. Some of the women wept. Some sat in stunned silence. Some refused to believe. Hildegard stood up. "This is propaganda. You are trying to make us feel guilty for losing the war." Vincent looked at her. His face was hard. "This is not propaganda. This is what we found, what we photographed, what we documented." He paused. "You want to know why we feed you, why we follow Geneva Convention? Because we saw what happens when nations abandon basic humanity. We saw the result. We will not become that." The barracks fell silent. Ilsa spoke quietly. "I worked in a military hospital. In 1943, they brought in prisoners from a camp to do manual labor. They looked like walking corpses. We were told not to speak to them, not to give them extra food. I obeyed those orders." Her voice broke. "I told myself I was just following orders. I told myself it was not my responsibility. But I saw them. I saw what was happening. And I did nothing." Greta reached over and took her hand. "We all saw things. We all chose not to see." Hildegard's resistance was crumbling. She sat down slowly. "If this is true," she whispered, "then what were we fighting for?" No one had an answer. April 20th, 1945. Late evening. Hildegard found Vincent sitting outside the mess hall, alone, smoking a cigarette. She stood in front of him, silent. He looked up, waited. "I need to understand," she said in halting English, then switched to German. "Why do you do this? Why feed us like you feed your soldiers?" Vincent stubbed out his cigarette. He stood, looked her in the eyes. "Because that is what the rules say, Geneva Convention." "Rules." Hildegard's voice was bitter. "You follow rules even for your enemies." "Especially for our enemies. That is what separates us." Hildegard's composure cracked. Her voice broke. "I believed in my country. I believed we were building something great. I believed the Führer when he said we would win. I believed everything." Tears ran down her face. "And now I learn that everything I believed was built on lies. That we were the barbarians. That our enemies have more honor than we ever did." She looked at Vincent with devastation in her eyes. "If everything I believed was wrong, then who am I?" Vincent was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, in slow, simple English, "You are someone who can choose differently now. That is who you are." Hildegard stared at him. Then she nodded and walked away. But something had changed. Some fundamental structure inside her had collapsed. And in its place, slowly, painfully, something new could begin to grow. One afternoon, as Greta was kneading dough, Vincent approached. He stood for a moment. Then he spoke in slow, simple English. "You are a good worker." Greta understood enough. She nodded. Vincent continued. "When war ends, you go home. You tell people what happened here." He gestured around the camp, the kitchen, the medical tent, the barracks where women slept safely. "You tell truth." Greta understood. He was asking her to be a witness, to remember, to testify that not all enemies were monsters. She nodded slowly. "Yes, I will tell." Vincent extended his hand. Greta looked at it. A handshake between enemy soldiers. She took his hand. His grip was firm but not crushing, respectful. When she released it, something had changed. She was no longer just a prisoner. She was a witness to something that mattered. May 8, 1945. The war in Europe ended at 11:01 p.m. the previous night. Germany had surrendered unconditionally. The 1,000-year Reich had lasted 12 years and 4 months. In the American POW camp near Koblenz, the soldiers celebrated. In the women's barracks, there was only silence. Greta Brenner sat on her bunk and stared at the wall. The war was over. But instead of relief, she felt dread. Because now came the question, what did she have to go home to? The next morning, Vincent Thibault assembled all 34 women in the mess hall. Through the translator, he delivered the news. "The war is over. Germany has surrendered. In the coming weeks, you will be transferred to British or French custody for final processing. Then you will be released to return to your homes." He paused. "I want you to understand something. You are not war criminals. You were auxiliary personnel. You will not be prosecuted. You will be allowed to go home." Some of the women began to cry, not from happiness, from the weight of everything those words meant. Vincent continued, "We have received preliminary reports about conditions in German cities." He read from a document. His voice was flat, clinical, but the words cut like razors. Cologne, 90% destroyed. Greta felt her chest tighten. Berlin, 70% of buildings damaged or destroyed. Hamburg, extensive firebombing damage. Dresden, near total destruction from firebombing in February. Elfriede made a small sound. Her entire family had been in Dresden. Munich, significant damage. Vincent folded the paper. "I am sorry. I know this is difficult news, but you need to know what you are returning to." The women filed out in silence. Greta walked to the fence and stared toward the west, toward Cologne, toward a city that no longer existed. She thought about her father. He had died in February. A British bomb had hit their building. Her mother and younger sister had survived in the basement, but her father had been on the stairs. Now, standing at this fence, the grief finally came. She wept. Behind her, Ilse stood beside her, also crying, then Liesel, then Elfriede, even Hildegard. 34 women standing at a fence, crying for a country that had destroyed itself. May 20th, 1945. The transfer orders came. The women would leave in 2 days. The night before departure, the Americans threw a farewell dinner. The mess hall was decorated. Someone had found wildflowers and put them in empty ration cans on the tables. Roast chicken, real potatoes, fresh bread, canned fruit, coffee, and corn. But this time, Greta helped prepare it. She and Lester worked side by side at the grill. When the meal was served, the American soldiers sat at the same tables as the German women, not as guards and prisoners, as people sharing a meal. Woodrow Patterson brought his harmonica. He played while everyone ate. Afterward, Vincent stood. He raised a tin cup of coffee. "You came here as enemies. You leave as people we have known. You will go home to a difficult situation. Your country has been defeated. Your cities are destroyed. Life will be hard." He paused. "But you have survived. You are still here. And what you do next matters. Go home. Rebuild. Tell the truth about what happened. Tell them what you saw here. Tell them that enemies do not have to remain enemies forever. Tell them that humanity is not negotiable." The room was silent. Then Ilse stood. She raised her own cup. "Thank you," she said in broken English, then switched to German. "You showed us that our government lied, not just about the war, about what it means to be strong. We thought strength was cruelty. We thought power was domination. You showed us that real strength is feeding your enemies. Real power is following your own rules even when no one is watching." She raised her cup higher. "We will remember." One by one, the other women stood. 34 women raising tin cups in a mess hall in occupied Germany. May 22nd, 1945. Morning. The trucks arrived at dawn. Lester had spent the previous day assembling care packages. Each package contained canned beef, chocolate bars, coffee, sugar, and 2 ears of dried corn. Greta held her package carefully. She walked over to Lester. From her pocket, she pulled a small piece of paper. She had spent hours on it, drawing with a pencil she had borrowed from Emmett. It was a picture of an ear of corn, with the words "Danke" written below. "Thank you." She handed it to Lester. He unfolded it, looked at it. His eyes went soft. "I'll keep this," he said quietly. He folded it carefully and put it in his shirt pocket, over his heart. Ilse approached Vincent. She extended her hand. "You are a good man," she said in careful English. "You see us. Thank you." Vincent shook her hand. "Go home. Tell them what happened here. The truth matters." Even Hildegard paused before climbing into the truck. She looked at Vincent. "Ihr seid keine Monster." You are not monsters. Vincent did not need a translation. He understood. "Neither are you," he said. The last aboard was Elfriede. Emmett helped her into the truck. As he did, she pressed something into his hand. A small bracelet, woven from thread she had pulled from her spare uniform. "Danke," she whispered. The trucks pulled away. Greta watched through the back flap as the camp grew smaller. She saw Vincent standing with his arms crossed, Lester waving, Woodrow with his hand raised in salute. Then they turned a corner and the camp disappeared. When Greta finally reached Cologne on May 25th, she almost did not recognize it. The train station was a ruin, the cathedral still stood, but everything around it had been flattened, 90% destroyed. The number had been abstract, now it was real. After 2 hours, she found her building, or what remained of it. The entire west side had collapsed, but the east stairwell still stood. She climbed carefully. She reached the 3rd floor. The door to her family's apartment was missing. She stepped through the doorway, but she heard something, a voice, from the back room. "Who is there?" Greta's heart stopped. "Mama?" A woman appeared in the doorway, thin, grey, but it was her mother. They stared at each other for a long moment. Then her mother said, "Greta?" "Yes, Mama." They moved toward each other, slowly at first, then running. They collided in the middle of the ruined room and held each other, both of them crying. "You are alive," her mother kept saying. "You are alive." Her younger sister, Anne-Marie, appeared behind their mother. 16 years old now, the three of them held each other in the ruins of their home and wept. Later, they sat on the floor. There was no furniture left. Greta shared the food from her care package, the canned beef, the chocolate, the coffee. Her mother stared at it. "Where did this come from?" "The Americans. They gave it to us when we were released." Her mother looked at her. "The Americans gave you food?" "Yes, every day, 3 meals a day, the same food their soldiers ate." Greta pulled out the dried corn from the package. Her mother recognized it immediately. "May? They gave you livestock feed?" "No, Mama. They eat it. Americans eat corn. It is food for people in their country." She told her mother the whole story. The camp, the first night, the refusal, the taste, the cooking lessons, Vincent's medical checks, Woodrow's music, Emmett's meticulous records. She told her mother about the Geneva Convention, about rules that were followed even in war, about enemies who could still be human. Her mother listened in silence. When Greta finished, her mother said quietly, "If they treated you so well, what does that say about us?" Greta had been asking herself the same question for weeks. "I think," she said slowly, "it says we were lied to, about everything." That night, sleeping on the floor of their ruined apartment, Greta made a decision. She would remember. She would tell the story. She would be the witness Vincent had asked her to be. The years that followed were hard. Germany in the late 1940s was a country rebuilding from nothing. But the Americans helped. The Marshall Plan poured billions into reconstruction. Food aid fed millions, and corn came with the aid packages. At first, Germans rejected it, just as the women in the camp had. But slowly, attitudes changed. People were hungry, and the corn was there. Eventually, they tried it. By 1950, sweet corn had become acceptable in West Germany. Farmers began growing it, stores began selling it. The cultural barrier had fallen. In 1948, Greta started teaching cooking classes in a rebuilt community center in Cologne. She taught traditional German recipes, but she also taught American-style grilled corn, and she told them the story of where she had learned. "An American soldier taught me this," she would say, "during the war, when I was a prisoner. He taught me that food is a language everyone can speak, and that kindness does not require a common tongue." Liesl Fischer opened a cafe in West Berlin in 1952. The menu included American-style grilled corn. On the wall, she hung a photograph from the camp. Customers would ask about it. Liesl would tell the story. Ilse Steinmann went back to nursing. In 1946, she began working at a hospital in Hamburg that treated displaced persons and refugees. Many of her patients were survivors of concentration camps. She worked until 1979. When she retired, she had treated over 15,000 patients. She kept a journal throughout her career. When she died in 1998, she donated it to the Hamburg Medical Library. Medical students still read it. Elfriede Langer's story took an unexpected turn. In 1947, she received a letter from an American soldier named Daniel Morrison, from Iowa. He had seen Elfriede during her time at the camp. He had worried about her. After the war, he had tracked her down. They corresponded for 2 years. In 1949, they met in person. In 1950, they married. Elfriede moved to Iowa, to a farm that grew corn. When she died in 2015 at the age of 89, her obituary mentioned that she had helped introduce American-style grilled corn to her German community after the war. Hildegard Dietz had the hardest journey. Her faith in the Reich had been absolute. The collapse of that faith nearly destroyed her. But in 1948, she was hired as a teacher at a girls' school. She taught history, but not the way history had been taught before. She taught her students to question, to ask for evidence, to distrust propaganda. She taught for 30 years. Hundreds of students passed through her classroom. When she died in 1987, she left her journals to the school library. In them she had written, "I learned the most important lesson of my life from an ear of corn. Pride can make you starve even when food is offered. Humility can save your life. 1987. Greta Brenner was 65 years old. She had married in 1950, had 2 children, lived a quiet life in rebuilt Cologne. When the German Oral History Project contacted her, she agreed to be interviewed. Greta sat in her living room, the camera rolling, and she told the story. The interviewer asked, "What did that experience teach you?" Greta thought carefully before answering. "It taught me that everything I had been told was a lie. Not just about Americans, about what strength is, about what civilization means, about who deserves to be treated as human. We were taught that we were the master race. But when we were defeated, when we were helpless, when we were at the mercy of those we had called inferior, they fed us, they cared for us, they followed their own rules even when we were their enemies. That is real strength, not the ability to crush others, but the ability to maintain your own standards even when no one would blame you for abandoning them." She paused. "A cob of corn taught me that. It sounds ridiculous, but it is true." The interview aired as part of a documentary series. Thousands of Germans watched it. Many contacted the producers. They had similar stories, small moments when enemies had shown humanity. Those stories had been buried for decades. Now they were surfacing. 1995. Greta was 73. Her granddaughter, Clara, was 12. They were in Greta's kitchen, making dinner together, making grilled corn. As they worked, Clara asked, "Oma, why do you always make corn like this?" Greta smiled. "Let me tell you a story." She told Clara about the war, about being captured, about thinking corn was pig food, about the American soldier who taught her to grill it. "What happened to the soldiers?" Clara asked. "I do not know. I lost contact with them after the war." "Could we find them?" Greta looked at her granddaughter. "Maybe," she said, "maybe we could." But the idea faded. Until 2010. Clara was 27. She was studying history at university. She remembered her grandmother's story. She decided to investigate. Through the internet, she contacted the Minnesota Historical Society. 3 weeks later, she received a response. They had Emmett Lindgren's journal. The journal was detailed, meticulous. And there, on April 9, 1945, Greta Brenner, age 23, height 5 feet 4 inches, weight 87 pounds, signals operator. Clara cried when she read it. The archive staff helped her track down what happened to the American soldiers. Lester Simons had died in 2003, but his family still had something, a small piece of paper, folded and yellowed, kept in a frame, a drawing of an ear of corn with the word Danke written below. Lester had kept it in his wallet for 58 years. Dad said that drawing reminded him that enemies are just people on the wrong side of a war, Lester's son told Clara. When the photograph arrived, Clara brought it to her grandmother. Greta was 88 now, frail, but her mind was sharp. She looked at the photograph, her drawing, kept for 65 years. She wept. "He kept it," she whispered. "All this time, he kept it." Clara showed her the journal entries, the evidence that her story had mattered. "Tell them," Greta said to Clara. "Tell them what happened. Tell them the truth. Tell them that peace does not begin with treaties. It begins with people seeing each other as human." "I will, Oma," Clara promised. Greta Brenner died in 2012 at the age of 90. But before she died, she did one more thing. She wrote down her recipe for grilled corn, by hand, on a card yellowed with age. She gave it to Clara. "This is how Lester taught me. Keep it. Pass it on. Tell the story." In 2015, Clara arranged something extraordinary. The recipe card and the drawing were brought together for the first time in 70 years. They were photographed side by side. The photograph was published in a German history magazine. The article told the whole story. The article went viral. Millions of people read it. Most people said, "This is a story we need. A story that shows enemies can become human to each other. A story that shows small acts of kindness matter." Today, the recipe card and the drawing sit in a museum in Berlin. But the real legacy is not in that glass case. It is in Clara, who became a history teacher and tells this story to every class. It is in Liesel's cafe, which operated until 2018, always serving corn with butter. It is in Ilse's journal, still read by medical students. It is in Elfrieda's children and grandchildren in Iowa, who grill corn every summer. And it is in Hildegard's former students, who still teach their students to question everything. 5 women, 1 meal, 67 years of legacy. But the question the story asks is not about the past. It is about now. Right now, someone is being taught to hate. Right now, someone is being told that their enemies are subhuman. Right now, someone is being given the choice. Maintain your hatred or take the risk of seeing the human on the other side. Greta Brenner faced that choice on April 9, 1945. Her stomach was empty. Her pride was full. The corn sat in front of her. She chose to eat. She chose to learn. She chose to remember. And that choice echoed for the rest of her life. The corn was just corn, but the choice was everything. What will you choose?